Hello, and welcome to our sneak peek with Sarita Cannon. We're going to be talking about her class, 21st Century Women's Autobiography today. I'm your co-host, curriculum coordinator, Matt Shears, and I'm here with my co-host, Linda Wing, who is our curriculum committee co-chair. We're both excited to be talking about this class and about Sarita. And Linda, why don't you say hi to folks?
Yes, I'm glad to be here, and I am, of course, as Matt just said, I'm the co-chair of the curriculum committee, and this is our first ever sneak peek. So you're all watching the inaugural effort towards the end, and I'm very glad to be participating in it. So it's my particular pleasure, however, to introduce Sarita Cannon. So Sarita is professor of English at San Francisco State University. I believe she's also the coordinator of the entire literature program there. And for those of you who are Cal alums, Sarita got her PhD in English from University of California at Berkeley. Go Bears. But I especially know Sarita because I took a course from her in the fall called Narratives of Black Resilience and Resistance. And that was a course from which I learned so much and enjoyed so much. It was one of the first courses that I took that was in person. It was a small course, and Sarita took us through 6 works of different kinds of literature, beginning with spirituals, and I think ending with Toni Morrison's Home. But we went through plays, essays, and novels, and slave narratives and autobiographies. And so we went through time, and we also looked at different genres of literature. So we learned a lot, and Sarita was a brilliant instructor because she gave us the historical context for each work. And also in the beginning of the course, which set us up for a wonderful learning community, she had all of us introduce ourselves and say a little bit about ourselves, which we all did. And when we arrived at the second class with Sarita, she knew everybody's name. So she would call upon us by name, refer us to each other by name. And so everyone felt known and seen by her. And we also saw her. So I especially enjoyed that about the course. And I'm really excited about looking ahead to this new course. Sarita, I was not the only one that gave Sarita rave reviews. Most of us did. In fact, all of us did. As co-chair of the curriculum committee, I was privileged to look at the evaluation. So I'm really excited to talk with Sarita today about her new course. I think it's related, the design of the course, to Sarita's newest work, which is Black Native Autobiographical Acts, Minefields of Authenticity. And so if I'm right, that could be the lead into Sarita talking about the works in this course. The first of which is Fun Home, a family tragedy comedy by Alison Bechdel.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm so happy to be here. Excuse me, I'm a little losing my voice a little bit, but we'll go get through it. Yeah, my teaching and my research really inform each other in vibrant and generative ways, and I'm so excited to be offering this course, this mini course of 4 fairly recent autobiographies by women, particularly women from historically marginalized groups. And the first text is Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. It's a 2006 graphic memoir that outlines Bechdel's childhood growing up in Pennsylvania with a father who was either gay or bisexual, but was closeted. And when she was in college, her father died, likely by suicide. So it's an exploration of her relationship with her father, her own coming of age and her own coming out as a lesbian. And I just think it's a brilliant and painful and beautiful work. Bechdel is, well known for her series, her cartoon series, Dykes to Watch Out For. And in this piece, she does just an amazing job of bringing this story to life through words and in images. And one of the things that she does that I find really fun as an English professor is that she has a lot of references to different types of literature. She's especially influenced by modernist literature. So those of you who are fans of Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, you may find some Easter eggs in there, some references to those texts. And the graphic memoir, I think, is a genre that has really come to the fore, particularly because of Art Spiegelman's Mouse 1 and 2, as well as Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, about coming of age during the Iranian Revolution. So this is a text that I think blurs genres, as the subtitle suggests, a tragic comic. There's something very tragic about this story, but there's also a lot that's funny, that's poignant. In addition to it being a personal history, it's also a family history, and it's also a history of sorts of the LGBTQ community. As we learn about the struggles that her father experienced, feeling that he couldn't come out as a gay or bisexual man in the 50s and 60s, and comparing that with the way that Allison talks about coming out and coming of age in the 90s. So this is one of my favorites to teach. And the other thing that I love, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about this in the course, fairly recently Fun Home was made into a musical, and it won several Tony Awards. Alison Bechtel herself was really involved with the creation of the musical, and I was kind of skeptical about the adaptation, but I saw it when it came to San Francisco several years ago, and really enjoyed it and found it quite moving. So I think it's a wonderful text to start with.
Yeah, this is one of these texts that we've had around our house for a long time. And I was walking maybe, a month or so ago, kind of around evening time, and somebody had done that thing where they set a bunch of books in a box out by the road, which always makes me a little sad. But on the very top was Fun Home. And I'm like, oh man, we have this at home, but this fate doesn't seem right. So I picked it up and I walked back home, and I came in, and my partner said, we have this. And yes, I know, but now we have a second one.
Yes, I was looking for some book reviews of Fun Home on the internet, but the first thing that came up was not a book review. It was a review of the Broadway play.
Right.
It also showed links to clips of the play. So I was really excited to see that it had been made into a play, as well as, being a graphic novel in the first place.
Yeah. Well, let's see what's happening in week 2. So on June 13th, you're going to be talking about the book Redefining Realness. Tell us why you chose this one.
So Redefining Realness is a wonderful memoir that falls into a lot of different categories. One of the things that I really love about this text, which takes us through Janet Mock's transition to womanhood, to her gender affirming surgery at the age of 19. But it also, kind of similar to Fun Home, has a lot of literary references embedded in it. So Janet Mock is a journalist, she's a director, she's a writer, she's an activist, but she's also fundamentally a reader. And so she talks about how in high school, she read Audre Lorde and Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, and how these writers of color, particularly Black women writers, really helped to shape her worldview and her sense of who she wanted to be as a black woman. And the other thing that I really appreciate about this book, it's very accessible, and I think can be a fast read, but it's also, I think, speaking to a lot of different audiences. She includes her own experiences, but she's also showing how, in the words of second wave feminists, the personal is political. She's showing that her struggles are representative of larger struggles of intersecting oppressions, of transphobia, of anti-Blackness, of misogyny, and so it's really an attempt to educate people who might not be in the trans or queer community about some of the struggles, but also about the resilience of queer folk, and especially of trans women.
So Sarita, based on your teaching, the course I talked about earlier, how do you see this book and the issues that it addresses connecting with the interests of OLLI members?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I was really struck by in the class that you took with me, Linda, last year, was how introspective and thoughtful OLLI members in that class were about their own positionality, often as white people, white women in particular, in our current landscape, and people were really grappling with how do we participate in structures of oppression without maybe even meaning to, but how can we look at ourselves and look at how we can become better allies, how we can become better advocates, not only for ourselves but for people around us. And I think Janet Mock's memoir really taps into that, and I think could serve as a jumping off point, as a springboard for introspection, but also the other part of it is action, right? You reflect on yourself, and then how do you use what you've learned to effect change in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next book is The Best We Could Do. And I know this author only, I have not read this book before, but I know that she illustrated a children's book with Tan Nguyen, who's a Pulitzer Prize author, who's also a UC Berkeley graduate. So I was glad to be introduced, at least in terms of at least the title right now, to this book. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So this is one of my favorite fairly recent discoveries and additions to my courses on autobiography. So Bowie's memoir is a personal memoir, but it's also like Mouse, like Fun Home, like Persepolis. It's a family narrative too. It's about her family's escape after the fall of South Vietnam in the 1970s, and their efforts to build new lives for themselves in the United States. And Bowie talks a lot about the sacrifices that parents make for their children, the ways in which parents may try to do what they think is best for their children, but that can sometimes backfire, as I'm sure many of us can attest to. But one of the things that I find really striking about the way that she structures this book is that she begins with the birth of her own son, and her mother being at her side as she was giving birth, and then her mother having to step away because of the trauma that was past trauma that was triggered as she's helping T through childbirth. And the piece is structured according to the 6 children that her mother gave birth to under very different circumstances. So it's a text very much about the parent-child relationship, and the ties that connect generations, as well as the distances that sometimes parents and children have to bridge. And it's also just exquisite. She actually was not a cartoonist, and she basically taught herself how to do comics in the course of writing and creating this book. And I just think it's a masterpiece.
Hey, Sarita, can you tell us, is there anything different about reading a kind of illustrated memoir? This seems like a particularly 21st century way to experience a narrative, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Such a great question. I mean, I find that with some of my students at San Francisco State, because their world is so highly visual, there's a kind of fluency that they have in reading images that I feel I don't have, and also maybe it's just because I didn't grow up reading comic strips, but I think for me, I have to slow down. I have to slow down to not only read the text, but also read the images. So learning how to read the choices that she makes about framing, about what's included, what's not included in the frame. How does she use color? What kind of does she create images that are expressionistic or realistic? There really is a whole vocabulary that is associated with graphic memoirs, and so it is a new experience. But I hope that, especially since 2 of the books that I've chosen are graphic memoirs, that we can really spend some time thinking about how we might apply those skills of close reading that many of us have honed in dealing with verbal texts, and apply those to visual texts.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Yes. When this book came out, T. Bui actually inscribed it to my daughter. Our kids are similar ages. So it's this beautiful inscription, and it's a beautiful book. But then, there are some scenes in the book that an 8 or 9-year-old maybe isn't quite ready for. So,
yes.
She kept trying to get it and get in there. We're like, no, you're going to have to read this when you get a little bit older. But it is a really fantastic book.
Oh, I love that.
Last but not least is Heartberries by Therese Marie Mayotte. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose this book? And it's the 4th and final book in your class, so it must have a little added weight to it in some way.
Yeah, so this is a fairly recent discovery as well. One of my interests is American Indian literature and American Indian cultures. Therese Marie Mayotte is a First Nation Canadian writer, and this is her debut book. She recounts her very troubled childhood, challenges with being a fairly young mother, and also her struggles with mental health. And it's an epistolary text in that all the text is framed as these letters that she wrote to her then partner, Casey, when she was in the psych ward, and her therapist had suggested that she write as a therapy. And So there's something that's really raw about what she's writing, and yet we know that she's made choices. We know that she's a skilled artist and that she's crafted this memoir. But I think one of the things that I find really moving is the way that she talks about motherhood, and she talks about intergenerational trauma. Particularly, she talks about her grandmother being in residential schools and the trauma that she and many of her generation endured, and Maya's own attempt, to break the cycle of abuse and trauma in her own relationships, and particularly in her mothering. And so there's a grappling, I think, with some really weighty and difficult issues, but issues that I think no matter who you are, I think are ones that are very universal. And I think, the other thing that I really appreciate about this text is its oral quality. So the title "Heartberries," it refers to a folk tale or a myth from the Salish people that she tells early on in the story. So, thinking about the ways that art and literature and myth and music and dance can be sources of connection to our roots, and also sources of healing. Those are some of the issues that she raises in this really exquisite book.
Sarita, when I took narratives of Black resistance and resilience from you, which in all the works that we looked at, there were many issues that were very challenging to read about and challenging to talk about. But what I appreciated is that you gave us the historical context for the work, starting with sorrow songs, also called spirituals. And I appreciate the way that you gave the context, because if I recall correctly, to put sorrow songs into context, you actually put quotes from W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass. And then to help us understand sort of the key points and also give us a launching pad for discussion, you would pull out like the song lyrics or quotes from the books that we read, so that we could look at the quotes as the basis for focusing our thoughts and comments. Are you going to follow the same kind of really wonderful instructional strategies in the upcoming course? Because this course also has very challenging issues to think about and discuss.
Thank you so much for that question, Linda. Yeah, I mean, I my degrees are in English, but I'm kind of a secret historian. I love history, and so I always like to provide that historical and social context to any piece of literature, piece of art that I'm teaching. And yeah, I'm a big fan of close reading, especially because I don't expect that everybody is going to have had the opportunity to read the book, but I still want people to feel like they can participate and that they can get something out of the class. So I think it can be helpful to choose, over the course of a 2-hour class, choose 3 or 4 at the most, passages that I think are really rich in terms of form and content, and that bring to the fore some of the larger issues that the author is grappling with. So yeah, that's definitely going to be an MO for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That I think eased everyone into sometimes difficult conversations. And I know that I really appreciate that you did that in my evaluation, and having seen the other evaluations, that was a very much appreciated MO of yours. So I'm glad to hear that you're going to continue that in the upcoming course. I have another question.
Yeah.
So Penn just recognized, I think for the first time, a memoir by Hua Shu. It's Stay True. It happens to be about his coming of age when he was at University of California, Berkeley. But what is that about? Because a memoir in some people's mind is the same as an autobiography, but I think Penn is bringing attention to a memoir as something distinctive from an autobiography. Your course does use that term, autobiography. So can you help us understand that?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and that I'll be spending some time on the first class talking about terminology. So two authors, two critics that I find really helpful for talking through the terms that we use to talk about memoir and autobiography are Sidonie Smith and Julia Watson. They are feminist literary critics who have done a lot of work on autobiography, and they have this term, life writing. It's kind of an umbrella term, and under that umbrella of life writing, we have memoir, we have diary, we have journal, performance art, we have autobiography, we have even biography is under that category. So I tend to like the capacious nature of a term like life writing, because it's inclusive enough to hold a lot of different types of work. But I think there are many assumptions that we make when we see a text that's labeled autobiography. We assume that it's true. We assume that it's first person. We assume that it's a written narrative of a single person's life. And in fact, autobiography and memoir and other kinds of life writing are constructed texts that are subject to the artistic impulses as well as the imperfect memory of their writers. So we really have to understand them as, yes, grounded in some kind of personal truth, but very often a first person memoir, always a first person narrative, includes other people's narratives. It might include visual elements, it might include oral elements, it might include poetry. There are so many different takes on traditional autobiography out there, and in this class I just did my best to try to find 4 that I love teaching and that I think will be of interest to OLLI students, but also that maybe challenge our expectations or our assumptions about what an autobiography is and what an autobiography does.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Let's see here. Well, Sarita, thank you for joining us, and OLLI members, thank you for joining us. This has been our sneak peek with me, Matt Shears, and my co-host, Linda Wing. And we really hope to see you this summer for 21st Century Women's Autobiography. Thank you.
This was a delight.
Thank you, Sarita.
Thank you. My pleasure.